Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Your Heart Magic. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. And today we are continuing our Archetypes of the Tarot series, and we are talking about card 7, the Chariot, and how to harness the power of the Chariot in our lives, how we can understand this archetype and utilize it as inspiration for our own journeys. So the Chariot is a card that innately means victory, success, overcoming obstacles. In the tarot deck, it's often depicted as a literal chariot with somebody riding it. And there's sort of this sense of power and control. And again, harnessing energy, harnessing forces. I think just the word itself, chariot, when you think about what the chariot was as a vehicle, makes you think about driving through something. And it is a card that feels very action oriented, very motivated, very strong in intention and in willpower. When the chariot is out of balance, and that might come through in a tarot reading if it's upside down in the deck, or in the context perhaps of the questions you're asking. Sometimes it can indicate dominance or like a singular focus to the end of not being able to see everything else. Sometimes it might mean being out of control if it is in an upside down or in a misplaced position. But typically when we are looking at the positive attributes of the chariot when it's in balance, it is a card that is really about victory and overcoming various obstacles in our life in order to meet and reach an end goal. Fun little story about the card, the chariot. Several years ago, this is back in 2019, I did a really fun 78-day tarot challenge. And I got the idea from Alice Grist, Dirty and Divine Tarot, which is a book that she wrote where she goes through the whole deck. And my understanding is she'd been reading the cards for a long time, but she was writing a book about the tarot and decided to day by day have a card a day and look at how that card showed up in her life. And so that really gave me the idea to do the same thing. And I've been reading the cards and working with them for 5, 6, 7 years at that point. It had been a while, but I love the idea of revisiting them. And one of my favorite things about working with archetype cards, whether you work with the tarot or you're just enjoying learning about archetypes and signs and symbols and thinking about how do these show up in my life, is that there's a richness to these symbols and archetypes that we learn about. There's a depth, there is a nuance. Our relationship to various archetypes and symbols will continue to change and continue to add new layers of wisdom, new layers of knowing as we change and as we move through our timelines and our relationship to ourself and our understanding of the world around us changes. So we can think we have a card all figured out, and it can be an old friend. And it can take on a fun new meaning in our life or start to show up during a life transition or in relationship to something that we keep asking about. And there is this new layer, this new nuance or richness to whatever it is that, whatever archetype from the deck that we're working with. So I did my 78-day tarot challenge, and I decided to structure it in my own way. I decided to put my intention into the cards at the beginning of my journey And I didn't want to go through them in linear order, starting with the major arcana card 0 and then working my way through the suites. Instead, I just put this intention into the deck and said, I am going to be pulling one of you every day for the next 78 days. And I'm going to ask the cards to arrange themselves in the pattern that will support whatever's coming for me on the journey. And so every day it felt a little bit like Christmas to me, where it was like, okay, what card will I pull today? And so I would shuffle the cards and lay them out, take the card that called to me after I divided them into a pile of 3. I've got this method for how I do it. And then after I had worked with that card for the day, I would set it aside so it didn't get reshuffled back into the deck. So what happened is over time, the cards I was shuffling and the ones I had to choose from got fewer and fewer. And it was delightful to see what cards showed up when and what cards and images presented themselves to me. And I have so many stories from doing that really joyful experiment and experience with the cards, where these certain cards would sync so perfectly to something that was going on in my life at that time. But what was really fun is maybe when I got down to like the last 15, 10 or something like that, and I knew which ones were left because I knew the deck really well. So it wasn't like I was totally surprised. Like I knew what major arcana cards I'd been through. I knew what minor arcana cards were left. And I had a small handful of a few major arcana cards that I hadn't yet pulled. And I remember on the last day of 2019, December 31st, pulling I, maybe had like 10 cards left. I was really close to the end. And I pulled the card, the Chariot. And I pulled the card, the Chariot, as a representation of what the year 2019 was about for me. And 2019 was very much a year of overcoming obstacles and harnessing energy. I wrote a lot about that time in my life in my book, Revelations of the Sky. And I was going through these really deep spiritual lessons of transformation. I'd been on the island of Kauai, oh goodness, just a few years. And I was really coming face to face with myself, face to face with the choices I'd made to just release the life as I'd known it in Alaska and come to this island and open myself up to my spiritual journey and, kind of put myself out there to spirit and said, okay, I'm here. I followed this soul calling. I know something's waiting for me here. Like, show me the way. And I've talked about this and written about it quite a bit. Of course, nothing went the way that I thought it was going to. And that was really the year where I stepped away from private practice and psychology, other than just keeping a tiny toe in the door with a couple clients. But I'd released all insurance contracts. I was really trying to grow speaking, to grow my spiritual work. I was really trying to grow as a writer. I was really trying to do new things like teach classes and teach workshops and kind of find a more creative voice for myself. And I was floundering that year. I was having a hard time doing it. I was having a hard time figuring out my path. And I had so many moments in 2019 where I felt really discouraged. I went through a couple little bouts of a depression during that time, of just feeling really dark on the journey, of really coming to this dark night of the soul and saying like, oh my gosh, did I throw away this great life that I'd created for myself to follow this spiritual path? And like, nothing's happening the way that I think it should. Did I mess up? And I really learned in 2019 how to keep coming back into my heart and my spiritual connection and trusting what I felt inside. And so this whole year was really exemplified by this energy of overcoming, of working with opposites, of trying to find balance, of wanting to give up because an obstacle was on my path, and then figuring out how to plow through it or go around it. And I remember that was my one of a little grace gift, we'll call it, at the end of that year, was pulling that card. And it really resonated with me. It really spoke to me. And I really felt like it embodied the essence of the Chariot and what it is to overcome and what it is to find some sort of victory, and victory can be defined by many things. But for me, at the end of 2019, I was ending the year in a better place than I'd started it. I had some nice things that I'd lined up. This was right before COVID was going to come and change everything, but I didn't know it at the time. And I had really learned that sometimes in order to stay with ourselves, we have to tap into the energy of this extreme determination and perseverance. And that's really what the Chariot is all about. So, looking at how we can tap into this card and understand it in a way that helps us feel empowered to see how the Chariot is already showing up in our lives. I have a few points and ideas that I wanted to share about how we can do that. And the first one is that the Chariot is really an invitation to focus on our goals and to set our intentions. This card is not about going with the flow. This is a card that has very active energy. It's a very intentional card. The person in the Chariot is not kicking back, eating a snack while the horse is pulling the chariot, do all the work, and they're just going to get there when they get there, and it's no big deal. This is really a card of effort and determination. And there is a place for that. It's interesting because a lot of what your heart magic focuses on is really more about learning to work with what I would call more receptive energies and learning to be in flow. I actually think that there is this lack of balance to especially Western culture, where there is this overemphasis on productivity and on goals and on doing. And so sometimes we feel like if we're not producing, or like if we don't have a goal, that somehow we're doing life wrong. And that's not what this episode today is about. If this makes you feel pressured at all, then it's not the right time to set some giant goal list for yourself. One of the best things I ever learned is if it feels like a should on our spiritual journey, then it's probably a shouldn't. If we feel like we have to do something in order to maximize being a human being, and somehow we're failing at humanity if we're not doing it, I think there's a spiritual mistruth in there that we're really invited to work through so that we can come to a gentler place of wanting to set goals and wanting to set intentions from a more joyful place, from a lighter place. Maybe from a place of just feeling that, yep, I'm going to have to do some hard work on this, but this feels really aligned with where I'm at right now, so I want to. I don't necessarily think it needs to come from a place where we feel like we're constantly in a battle. And so the Chariot really encourages us to not only set goals and set intentions, but I suppose it encourages us to kind of choose our battles. If you want to do something goal-oriented, write a book, run a race, go somewhere for travel, then there might be some obstacles and things that you have to overcome in order to make that happen. But you might say that's absolutely worth it for me because I really want that high fruit on the tree. And so I am willing to climb that tree and to figure out my way all the way to the top because I really want to reap the rewards when I get there. But I think that oftentimes there are many things in life where we can be distracted. There are many times that we are striving for something and it might not feel meaningful for us. It might not feel personally significant. And your heart magic is about learning to listen to our hearts and learning to align with the things that feel significant to our hearts. So if you are working on your spiritual growth this month, then perhaps the Chariot for you is how can I set an intention around what I might do to support my growth? And how could I set a goal in that? Maybe you're really inspired by this idea of doing the 78-day tarot challenge. I'll leave a link to Alice's book, Dirty and Divine Tarot, in the write-up section of this. Maybe you're inspired to seek out some sort of a meditation class or some sort of maybe an app or something that has like a card reading a day that you want to do or tap into. Maybe you just want to make sure that you take a little bit of time in the morning and set an intention for the day before you get lost in the shuffle and get lost in the stream of daily life. If you have a spiritual goal like that, then setting an intention to say, I'd like this month to be a month of growth for me, and figuring out like what's the goal that I'm working on is a wonderful way to harness the energy of the chariot. And I've always found that when we talk about goal setting, that when we set small measurable goals, that is usually the best way to help move us in a direction of growth. So often, we shut ourselves down because something feels too big, or we say, I want to do this big thing. But then it feels kind of insurmountable. And all we see are the obstacles, or we feel like we decide to, let's say you kind of set a goal around, I really want to work on my spiritual growth right now. And you're not specific. That's just kind of how it goes out there. And then maybe you say, I'm going to meditate more. But again, it's not small or measurable. It's just this, I'm going to meditate more. And look at those master meditators who say they do it for 30 minutes. I really want to be like that. So you try once or twice to meditate for 30 minutes. And let's say it goes very poorly and you can't focus and keep getting interrupted, or you're trying to meditate. And then you like look at your phone and find that you're scrolling something and checking something like that. And you are like, oh my gosh, I totally failed at this. And that goal goes right out the window. I would encourage anybody to break it down into something much smaller. If you have a goal around anything, personal development, doing something, creating something, don't just think of the big thing of somebody who inspires you or what the inspired dream is, but think of something that might be achievable within 30 days or within a moon cycle. Think of something much smaller where you can say, okay, well, I'm just going to start with twice a week doing a 5-minute meditation. And then maybe you'd say, well, how am I going to do that? And so you download an app or find something on YouTube or something like that that you can listen to. Make it measurable, because when we do that, we're more likely to follow through. And when we follow through, we start to have a sense of success. And we have a sense of feeling like we're actually making measurable changes in our life, and we are finding achievement towards our goals. There's nothing out there that says what a goal has to be or what an intention has to be. And when we talk about learning to do things in a way that is more aligned with our heart, that's where there's a lot of room to declutter this old junk of what success really is, what achievement really is, what accomplishing something really is, and to truly figure out values and goals that work for us, that feel in alignment with our heart, that feel like they honor our pace and our energy and our understanding of our purpose. And then we take those heart aligned goals and intentions. And that's where we bring the chariot in and say, all right, then how do I want to accomplish this? How can I feel successful at this? How can I feel more in alignment with succeeding at these visions and intentions in my heart? Something else that the chariot invites us to do is to balance energies and to overcome obstacles. The chariot is very much a card about learning to harness power. It is a card that often represents harnessing the tension between the spiritual and the physical, the heavens and the earth, the masculine and the feminine, emotion and logic and calculated action. I've seen it depicted in many ways in various decks, but there's often this theme of harnessing energies that can sometimes be in opposition. So if our head says go this way and our heart says go in a different direction entirely, How do we listen to both of those? How do we choose and decide which one to honor? Can we somehow bring them into harmony? Can we learn to bring balance to those two tensions? Can we learn to follow the logic for a while until we start to feel maybe a little bit stale or uninspired, and then listen to our heart and follow that so we get all this fresh inspiration, and then follow the logic a little bit more after that and take some calculated strategic steps? Like, can we find a way where we kind of go right and then we swerve left, and then we go right and then we swerve left, and maybe after a while we figure out that we're not really moving in opposition. We are taking two conflicting energies and weaving them together to support us in a very grounded approach that helps us move in an aligned direction of our heart, and yet do it intelligently so that we feel that we are not wasting our efforts or wasting energy. And so the Chariot really asks us to consider, what tensions are we balancing in our life? What things are in opposition that you might be juggling right now? When I pulled that card in 2019, one of the things that was a big theme of that year for me is kind of like, what do things look like on paper? And what they look like on paper weren't great. Like, I didn't feel like I was seeing my professional goals, and which very much are kind of tied into my spiritual purpose and my understanding of that. I didn't really feel like I was seeing the growth that I wanted to see, that helped me feel like I was successful or moving in the right direction. At the same time, my heart said, like, don't give up on this. There's something for you here. Like, stay with yourself. You haven't messed anything up. This is just a rough patch. It is perhaps a testing. It is a time to really go through shaking off of old self and loosening this old identity so that you can move a little bit further into trusting your spiritual path. And so I had these oppositional energies where I really couldn't figure out what's my path here. And when I listened to my heart, it felt like everything was still moving me in the right direction. But when I listened to like where logic was at and my mind was at, I had all these doubts and all these worries and all these questions. And how did I bring those into harmony? How could I bring those into harmony? How could I learn when to listen to my heart, when to listen to my head, how to get them to work together? Those were some of the big lessons that year. It was to really trust the vision in my heart. And yet at the same time, something that came from that time in my life was learning creatively as an entrepreneur, how to think more out of the box, how to see myself as like this one woman CEO of my own little tiny company. And like really kind of step my game up and do things that put me out of my comfort zone. And that's what kind of eventually segued me into doing more speaking and starting to gain confidence in my voice. I had to go create those opportunities and really start to seek them out and put myself out there in new ways. And I did those things because my heart said, this is the right direction to move in. And when I finally got my mind balanced with my heart, my mind said, but you're going to have to be smart about it. It might not just fall in your lap. You might have to create it. So whatever those opposing energies are for you, how can you bring balance to them in your life? And the Chariot is the opportunity and the invitation to consider those things. And the overcoming obstacle part, what's interesting is sometimes an obstacle is external. Sometimes it is something that is put there in our path by a circumstance, by a system in the world of this is just how it works. And so if you have to move through the system, you have to figure out the rules of it or figure out how to go around it. Sometimes the obstacle has something to do with location or timing or monetary reasons. There's many things that can feel like barriers and obstacles where sometimes we have to get really creative and either figure out a way around them or figure out another way if a traditional way isn't working. If you want to publish a book and you feel like you don't have access to that, Do you have access to something like, if you have access to the internet, can you hop on Canva where you can create a little book for free with a free profile there using their graphics and some of their layouts, and put together a small book and publish that as a little ebook or something that you do in PDF form. If your big goal is some sort of giant publishing contract, but that feels really far away and you haven't even written the book yet, can you publish something small? Can you self-publish something? How could you figure out a way to overcome that obstacle and create a success experience for you, even if it's not your total end goal? And sometimes the obstacle is inward. Sometimes it is us. It is something inside of ourselves where we are the ones who are getting in our own way. And if we would just get out of our own way, then we'd realize there's actually not that many obstacles there at all. And what's interesting about this is how often we perceive obstacles where there might not be one. We don't really know until we try. So if you've tried something like 20 times and said, no, I really have been trying this and nothing I've done has worked, there might be some legitimate external obstacles in your path. But a lot of times we're the ones who talk ourselves out of it. We say, well, somebody's already done what I want to do, so it must not be worth creating. Or we convince ourselves that it's somebody else's dream to enact something that we have dreamed inside of ourselves. Well, somebody else has already done it better, or who am I to do this thing? Or who am I to create this? Or I could never do that because it's just not who I am, except we secretly want to. We have some really interesting stuff that we are all transmuting. And a lot of times our stuff is this like giant lump of preconceived doubts and judgments and fears and these accepted notions of, well, this is just how it is. And oftentimes, until we begin to challenge those and ask ourselves, who taught me that? Where did I learn that? Did I learn that from my family of origin? Did I learn that in school? Did I learn that from society? Is that a reflection of some wound in me? Where did that come from? Maybe it came from all of the above. Our wounds and the patterns inside of us that we work on shifting and healing tend to be based on all sorts of things, from family stuff to ancestral wounds to sometimes karmic stuff that are collective karmic stuff that we're all shifting. Sometimes it's self-imposed stuff that we were encouraged and we came up with it anyways and developed a real strong voice of criticism inside of ourselves based on some aspect of our personality. There's many things that can create those self-imposed limitations inside of us. So sometimes the Chariot, even though it's a card that is about external victory and it's kind of this external overcoming card, I actually think how this archetype applies to living heart-centered is learning to overcome the things, the voices of the mind, maybe the old stories inside of us that keep us from believing what's in our heart and believing the things that we might feel called to do or to create or to experience in this world. We are often the ones who have to learn to get out of the way of ourselves and stop being our own obstacle so that we can become a bigger expression, so we can become a more expanded person than we are giving ourselves credit for being. So the Chariot is an invitation to work on shifting that. And the last thing that I want to share about the Chariot today is that I think that it is also an invitation to reimagine our relationship with the word victory and really redefine that word for us. Now, on a surface level, if you're doing a reading where you've set a goal for yourself, and you ask about maybe a new career path or a creative project or some personal development stuff, and you pull the Chariot in the reading, usually that's a card of you will be successful at this. You're going to have some sort of victory at this. It's usually a really positive card. And so in a very superficial way, we can always understand it as this kind of linear, you'll be successful at whatever it is that you're shooting for and that you're hoping to accomplish. But I like to go a little bit deeper with all of these archetypes. And as I was sitting here today thinking about the talking points to share, it occurred to me that why not take this opportunity to keep challenging our notion of what is success and what is victory and what is achievement and what do those words mean to us? Because I think often this is where a lot of people can get really tripped up because they feel like they're not somehow meeting achievement, success, or victory unless they are, again, producing or having something really tangible to show. And I do think that there are absolutely times where we work really hard at something and we get a tangible result. I love that feeling. It's a fantastic feeling to have something, whether it's an award or a promotion or you finished a project and it got good feedback. It's a wonderful feeling to have that, but we don't always have that. Sometimes we're working on things like relationship healing. How do you measure success in that? Maybe you have been working on trauma and shifting some like very deep emotional wounds around trauma or trauma in a family system. Like, how do you measure success in that? I guess in theory, we can always make small measurable goals and say, am I feeling less triggered by this? Am I better able to emotionally regulate? I don't know. I could come up with like a treatment objective list as a psychologist for how somebody might look at trauma, but that feels like so linear and like we're trying to quantify something that is really more about embodying a quality, and that can be really hard to capture in any kind of a number or benchmark or something like that. There's so many things that so many of us are putting work into, and we are really embodying that chariot energy of working on personal healing, relationship healing, being a good prayer warrior for the world, being a light worker in this world, working on kindness and spreading the energy of kindness. Maybe you're learning to increase your relationship with nature and to be more peaceful because you know that if you're more peaceful, you will bring that energy into the spaces you embody, and it can't hurt to be a peaceful contribution as you move about your community. We need more peaceful contributors. We need more creatives. We need more artists. We need more voices that look at things from a more radical view of love and spiritual perspective. And so how do we measure those things? Where's the victory or success in that? And so I think that's where the Chariot is really this invitation to think about all of these questions from the perspective of the heart. What does your heart tell you about success in your life? What does your heart tell you about how you're already victorious? What does your heart tell you about what you have achieved or accomplished so far in the year 2023? What does your heart tell you about all of these things? That is really where your guidance and your value system and your reinvention of these concepts is going to come from. Like we talked about at the beginning, when we are listening to our hearts and we are following the vision in our hearts and following the guidance that our heart gives us, that's when we take goals in that direction. That's when we set intentions around that. Maybe healing for you is saying, I feel like I'm in a really negative mood every day, and I just want to work on gratitude and being more positive. And there's all this stuff in my life and the world right now that feels unsolvable. And I spend a lot of time feeling overwhelmed, and I would just like to feel more peaceful inside. And so when I listen to my heart says, stay close to what's real, spend time in nature, and work on appreciation. And so maybe you decide then I'm going to make a short gratitude list and I'm going to try and take more walks or get outside more or do something where you're working with nature. Could that be successful if you followed through on that? Can we say that you are setting an intention, you are taking small measurable steps, and that you are having victory over an aspect of yourself that is feeling really kind of knocked off course by the chaos in the world. And the victory being that you are bringing yourself back into this more thoughtful space in your heart, this space of light in your heart that is helping you stay connected to your spiritual connection, to your heart wisdom through nature, through gratitude, and through these simple steps of authenticity. So I really think that when we look at this card, if we can kind of twist it in a really fun way and redefine it from the perspective of the heart and kind of understand the Chariot on two levels. What's the superficial level of this? It's all the victory, determination, perseverance, all those good things. And we need those things. There's lots of value in those things. And many of us are already using those energies in our life. But I also think we can go a little bit deeper and look at it from the perspective of the heart and really kind of shake these concepts up in a way that syncs a little bit more with our heart wisdom and a little bit more with the energy of the heart and the language of the heart. And that is a beautiful way to harness the energy of the Chariot. All right. With that, we will wrap up here for today and turn our attention to next week, where we are going to be talking about the 3 Gs, grace, growth, and gratitude, and looking at just some fun inspiration for each of those qualities. How might they support us on the spiritual path? How does giving ourselves grace and being in a space of gratitude actually support our growth? And really looking at the relationship between all of those. Also, it's the month of November. And for many, they might celebrate like the beginning of the holy day season. And so I always think that turning our attention to gratitude this time of year is a beautiful way to begin to start to close out the end of the year during these last 2 months. So I'm looking forward to whatever comes through to share with everybody next week on the podcast. In the meantime, have a beautiful week and be well, be love, be you, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.